Thank you so much, Dr. Isham, especially for making our today's topic very relevant to the local context. And indeed, it's a very engaging at times kind of activity to see people discussing, you know, if you can call a pretzel dog, or you're going to be deprived of a halal license. Yeah, can you touch a dog? And I don't know, this kind of different issues. Not only in Malaysia, it's been Islam being less and less relevant to the modern context. At the same time, it's being used for political ends. You can see, you know, the whole world now is observing what's happening in Iran, the recent protests, and how rhetoric is being put. People unhappy with the socio-economic conditions, but the leaders again and again applying this rhetoric of fitna and various terminology relevant for some other context, perhaps. We don't have so much time left, and we were supposed to already start our discussion. So maybe we open the floor for first questions. Just please introduce yourself.
Okay, so I mentioned just now, for my question, I would like to start with Prof. Ebrahim Musa's proposition, mainly on how can we see, how can we use, or at least how can we even imagine a new framework of Islamic reform which we could later apply to the Muslim societies and basically our life. Because we understand having a framework, even to come up with a framework, even that is something which could be very complicated. Usually a framework must have an epistemological point of view, and it must have a philosophical discussion and debate. And at least from my readings, among Muslim scholars, we have in a way have yet to develop the tradition of philosophy and the tradition of critical thinking in our scholarships. Meaning that if we are going to come up with a framework of Islamic reform, or even a framework of religion, it would later turn out to have something like a new version of theology. We might need to share, or we might need to get a lot of philosophical discussions from the Western discourse or from other civilizations, which I think have advanced quite rapidly when it comes to philosophical discourse. So in this aspect, how much could we be open in considering the other dimensions in shaping our own framework, while at the same time, how much can we still rely on the traditional scholarship, mainly going back to developing to the framework? And if you could point out some or a few examples on perhaps the more contemporary or even the more recent proposition by scholars in trying to come up with a new framework, as I think Prof. Tahir have also pointed out one on Ibn Ashur's framework, and in fact the presentation by Dr. Isham itself on Ali Shariati, which includes a dialectical element, which I'm sure is not something foreign from the discussion of the non-Muslims or even the Western civilizational and philosophical thought. So going back to that question on the more elaboration on the frameworks to look forward to for Muslim scholars in the future.
Thank you. I don't know about you, but I was freezing at some point. But this place is kept frozen all day. This morning I have breakfast out here. I sat outside. But a lot of people were sitting inside. I don't know how they managed it. So people are hot-blooded here. I'm cold. But that's fine. I mean, there's a certain rules, I guess, they have to follow. So thank you to my colleagues, Dr. Mesawi, Dr. Isham, for their contributions. And I don't think I disagree with anything they said. And I think that we are looking at the phenomenon from different points of view. So to your question, the key question is that I think that the way we adopting the issue of reform is often has been for more than a century a textual understanding. So whether it is Ibn Ashur who goes to the early scholars and trying to make some movement and getting us maqasid, right? Or with Muhammad Abdu and others, Muhammad Abdu read, the stuff that the people were reading in Tunisia. They were reading Shatibi. Muhammad Abdu got that book to Egypt, asked a man by the name of Abdullah Daraz to edit it and so on. And then, the maqasid debate became popular. What I see is the absence of a philosophical tradition. And the philosophical tradition is multifaceted. It looks at the various issues. So for instance, I immediately want to say that the issue that Professor Mesawi pointed out is the whole question of, the key question was that of human development. I mean, the thing is that, how is it that we have human beings who have become dehumanized, right? And why do about 3,000 young Tunisians leave for ISIS land? And they're going to come back and they're going to be angry and they're defeated and they're going to cause more problems in Tunisia. That's already a given. But there are, you see, whether we want to say that this is a product of society and this is not an Islamic issue, we need to look at this issue much more in complex ways. So first of all, I think the way we think about the religion is itself somewhat problematic. The world is governed by, in many places, by secular forces. Secular forces have created the modern world in which we're living. Muslim societies have also become secular, but secular in a different way. Many parts of societies in the world, in the West, have become post-secular societies. So in America is a post-secular society. In other words, there is secular, but there's also a strong place for religion in society. Trump was elected by a religious right, very strong religious right. The stuff that happened to Jerusalem that he declared is a promise he made to the religious right in America. So many parts of the world are post-secular. I would say that even many parts of the world are effectively post-secular. So even in Europe, for instance, they might have secular constitutions in France or in Germany, but religion is prevalent in societies. And especially the arrival of Muslims in France has made many secular French discover their Christian cultural heritage. They've discovered their cultural heritage because of the presence of Muslims. Because Muslims, adhere to religion and so on. So we need to think about the question, what is the nature of religion? The other thing is that also Muslims have not settled the question in their own minds and their own souls, what is the relationship between what we call the worldliness and the salvation aspect? What is the worldliness and how does worldliness lead to salvation in the afterlife? We have not settled this completely, and in modernity this issue has become even more complicated for us. So for instance, historically, if you think about the word deen meant that which is what is prevalent, what we today would call what is cultural. That is deen. Ad-deen huwa al-'ada. It is what is customary. Many of the rules and regulations that Islam adopt are cultural practices of the Arabs as the beginning of a moral community. They form a moral community around the practices. It's about slaughtering camels and sheep. It's about going around a place in Mecca and walking around that sacred temple. It is about fasting at the particular times according to the customary practices, marriage and divorce, those kind of stuff. That becomes the template. And if we had time, I would explain. Shah Waliullah gives a good explanation to some of this stuff, how it happens that a prophet's own tribal community becomes the basis for a moral conversation. although the ideal would be that the Prophet would actually take the average rules and regulations of all the tribes and communities he is administering to. But because people don't come to the Prophet at one time, it takes them decades and so on. So the Prophet begins the conversation by starting with his community's rules and regulations as the beginning of the conversation, of the model conversation. Right? Shah Waliullah got away, but he leaves the question open, and he makes some very controversial things that I've written about when he says that, therefore, he says the early communities follow these rules and regulations because it works for them. It's part of their cultural practices. The later communities follow these rules and regulations because they want to belong to this community. And therefore he says, but you should not push too hard on the matters of sha'air, on the symbols and the hudud. بل يشفق عليهم بالجملة. بل يقبقي عليهم بالجملة. And that you should show compassionate to those communities. It's a very controversial statement he puts there. People have been argued for decades now, what does he mean by that? And I think he's opening the conversation that the moral law of a community, my argue would be, is something that keeps on evolving, given the changes in the circumstances. But he doesn't say that explicitly, except for this very line, and I published it in an article, Social Change in Islam. You can find it in academia.edu, where I try to elaborate on this. So the issue of, or if you look at a 16th century scholar by the name of, his name, Abu al-Baqa al-Kafawi, and in his dictionary on deen, he says, "Ad-deenu wad'un ilahiyyun sa'iqun dawil uqul bi ikhtiyarihim al-mahmud ila al-khayri bidhat." That ad-deen is, now this is a late definition, this is 16th century. I'm still working on trying to figure out how they theorized it earlier. But this 16th century scholar, he is an Ottoman scholar who became the Qadi in Jerusalem, died there, and later scholars, all the major dictionaries like Tahanawi and others, all took from him. And he says that deen is a divine order that drives intelligent people based on their ikhtiyarim al-mahmud, on their kind of good choices to the idea of the good per se. In other words, deen is about the good. How to advance the common good that we will talk about. By their good choices, they will arrive and they must come to the common, the good. Ila al-khayri bidhat. So this is what the maqasidi approach also tries to push about how the good should come about, right? The good is about that. So, but I think because of the modern world's movement of secularity, the idea of religion became separated from life itself. Religion became separated from life itself, and all societies that went through that are now seeing that a reversal. That even secular societies, I think that religion must be conversant with the world in which we are living. We cannot keep the separate things. So if you look at Christian or Jewish theology, for instance, it takes science very seriously. It takes politics also. In Christianity, they made a deal that they will separate the power of religion and so on, but Christians will follow the government of the day. It's a religious obligation to follow the government of the day, because the government advances the common good. In Islamic societies, the religious sector says, we define the common good and we hate you, though you people in the government. Or you people in the government have no legitimacy. And the government buys off the religious people, or the religious people threatens the government, and they either pay off and threaten all the time. So it's about spoiling and bribing. So we haven't worked this thing out yet in Muslim society. We haven't worked this out. I mean, look at what happens in Egypt when Sisi overthrows Mursi. Two big scholars get into a conversation. Ali Guma, who was the former Mufti of Egypt, says that, use the word al-imam al-ma'zul la shar'iyyata lahu. The imam who has been deposed has no legitimacy. He means Mursi. Mursi is gone, he's got no legitimacy. Qaradawi, who's also Egyptian, argues from Doha that Mursi, that Sisi is a rebel. He's a rebel, he's a Baghi. Now just think of which pages these two scholars are speaking from. Before I tell you which pages they are talking from, if you remember, Egypt wrote a constitution. They had rules of the game of how governance will happen. What are the rights of parliament? What's the rights of the armed forces? What do they do, right? The language of legitimacy and illegitimacy that these two very prominent scholars talk about comes from 11th century Muslim political theology. There's nothing talking about, first of all, thinking of Mursi as an imam. The language of imam is about the caliphate. That system is long gone, except in the minds of many millions of Muslims who still want to revive the caliphate. I promise you, it's many millions. It's not only ISIS folks. Many people in this room might still be thinking that one day they're going to have the caliphate. That's going to join Aceh to Andalus. From Aceh to Andalus. I don't know, keep on dreaming, but at least I cannot foresee that. So we don't understand that one part is about governance, is about the good. On the other hand, we have these kind of visions that some of the best Muslim intellectuals also talk from that page. What both Guma said and Qaradawi says is totally irrelevant to the rules of the game in Egypt, which was a democratic system that they agreed to, and that Sisi overthrew that system, and he's a dictator, right? That should have been the language. But the point is, we don't have common agreement on the language of governance. There are some people on the 11th century page, there are people on who want the caliphate, they don't want the Umayyad caliphate, they don't want the Abbasid caliphate. These are all bad ideas. They want to go back, right back to the Khilafat al-Rashida. That's Maududi, okay? So there is just no clarity. The lack of clarity in Muslim societies is precisely because our scholarship that we have, religious scholarship, is zero. I'm sorry. I mean, not criticizing anybody, but we need tens of thousands of people to think in the direction of creativity that you might have good outcomes. So when someone talks about, about maqasid, it is such a fresh idea, we are prepared to make that person the Shaykh al-Islam of the time. Right? Because it's such a great idea that helps us out of this thing. Whereas we know that maqasid thinking also has a limited shelf life. There's a lot of stuff that you need to work through. How are you going to interpret the Sunnah? How are you going to interpret the Quran? Are you now going to not kill people anymore? If you say life is sacred, on what basis are you going to now execute people? If you say life to preservation of life, then you must make an exception. Well, under these rules, we are going to kill people. Okay? So life is not an absolute principle then, right? So there's a whole bunch of stuff that needs to be worked out that we have not worked out. So the question of governance and politics is the biggest issue. And I'm increasingly coming to the conclusion that all these reform ideas, you can have the best interpretation of Islamic equality between men and women, pluralism and so on. If you don't have a political system, that enhances the common good and makes decent human beings, where human dignity becomes the central theme of governance, everything is going to go to hell. Everything is going to go to hell. So governance is the key issue. You must have good governance. Okay, the mic is also dying. So it's a good sign from the cosmos that I'm a shara. That the question of hello? Yeah. That the question is that you need to have good governance. And because good governance is what is absolutely crucial. Societies flourish when there's good governance. And you have to read the book by the Syrian thinker Kawakibi, who wrote the book on the whole question of how despotism kills education and those kind of stuff. So I agree with my co-panelists who talked about the need for education. But education, see, everybody now wants Islamic education. They want to put the children into Islamic schools. It's all about where my daughter, mostly women, can be safe. They can wear the hijab and they will not be bothered. But it's not about intellectual excellence. It's not about intellectual excellence. Or some of the Islamic schools charge you a lot of money. I'm talking about around the world. And they're very good at making the students have good test scores so they can get into university. But it doesn't create creative individuals. Anybody can get good test scores to get into and become a good doctor or engineer. But the kind of doctor, engineer or scholars that you need today are people who are going to be creative individuals. So for instance, creativity starts with art and music. And if we talk about art and music and talk about music, whether you're going to talk about Ravi Shankar or you're going to talk about Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, it's all haram. So you're already starting there, and most people listen to music. But music is a philosophical thing of creativity. Art as creativity. Thinking outside the box. It begins long before that. It begins thinking outside the box, and creative individuals begins at preschool level. So oftentimes what we do is that we created regimented individuals. And they can have good test scores, they can get into European and American universities and come back home with fancy degrees, but it doesn't mean that you are going to be creative and you're going to have creative solutions to Malaysia's problems, or Indonesia's problems for that matter, to think outside the box. So the question is one of creativity and governance. And we need to have human development, because I increasingly begin to say that why did those 3,000 Tunisians go? Why do good South Africans, where I'm from, people that I studied with, my neighbor in Deoband, where I studied, he went to join ISIS after 40 years after graduating. He's an alim, and he says that everything he studied in India was wrong. The real Islam is with ISIS. He took his 2 sons and daughter and wife. I knew this was going to happen. And I'm not a prophet. Because these things are defective, and so he comes, he's taken, and his one son got killed 2 years ago, and this guy is sitting right now in a camp in Jordan. What makes those individuals go there is because within Muslim societies, there's such lack of clarity. A friend of mine tells me that while ISIS was still having his good day, on Eid day at his sister's house, a number of guys were saying, you know what, we better go to ISIS land and get ourselves a few slaves. They talk openly. And, if we have the slaves, we have concubines, and they're going to help our wives, and our wives won't have to work that hard. The very idea of thinking that, right? Or the way I always confront this thing that people want to say, suicide bombing is a good idea, we should do that, and so on. And I meet these people whether it's in Paris or Cairo, or whether it's in Delhi or in Lahore, or even in North America, then they want to talk about what a great thing it is to do suicide bombing and all these people get killed. The easiest way to stop that conversation is said, okay, it's okay to send other people's children for become suicide bombers. Can we not send your son or daughter? That just ends the conversation right there. It's very good to be Monday morning in America, you talk about Monday morning quarterback, who talks about how the game should have been on Saturday. It's very easy to be, a armchair jihadi, send other people's children to death, you see. But the problem is now that out of Indonesia and a few Malaysians also went to ISIS land. Where does this come from? You cannot blame, you have to take responsibility. This comes from the messed up situation of both governance and the religion in this country or in other countries, and the lack of clarity. Because these are not deviant individuals, they become deviant, but they are your children. They are our children. These 3,000 people that went to ISIS land from Tunisia, they are not throwaways. They are our responsibility. And unless we're not going to think about how do we prevent 3,000 more from being created, we need to begin to think with compassion and in much more complex ways. Shariati, Dr. Isham quoted him, Shariati obviously, is a certain time and mode of revolutionary thinking. He creates the good Islam and the bad Islam, right? Good Muslim, bad Muslim. I don't think I'm there on that page anymore, right? I mean, that's good for revolution, but Shariati is an ideologue. An ideologue is about mobilizing people to a cause. That was revolutionary, pre-revolutionary Iran. He has to mobilize people in that way. It's also got to do with some, the way some Muslims understand history, that there was a good version of history and a bad version of history. That kind of thing is going to drive you into ideological cul-de-sac. You need to accept the hand life has given you. And history has given you, and you have to study your history in all its complexities. There was a Sunni, and there's a Shia, there's a Mu'tazili, and so on and so forth. I cannot be caught up in to thinking, who was right, Ali or Muawiyah, or who should have been the Imam. That is a past. I cannot change that. I cannot change that. And I need to deal about what is my reality today. But what Shariati is pointing out to, where I identify with him, is that you need to have an Islam that has motion in it. It must be an idea that, Islam is an idea that moves. So when he criticizes the people, the Islam of people who are stagnant and so on, he's talking about the clerics who have gone stagnant. Now, Muhammad Abdu and other people also criticized the clerics of their time as stagnant, okay? In every way in the world. But that stagnancy means that you have to produce something better. And we have to create systems that remain open and will continue change. Now, we talked about reform, so I limited my remarks to the question of reform, but the ideas of reform cannot be without the political economic conditions that comes around it. And I'm not qualified to talk about that. I'm not an economist. I'm not a political theorist. But Muslim reformers and reform ideas must be in conversation with political thinkers, with economic thinkers, of how do you optimize the human good? How do you share resources? Why are all of you here today and not in ISIS land? The reason is either you are cowards, that you didn't go and the call for jihad was made, or you think that those people who are called are absolutely crazy, and you're absolutely right about that. Or thirdly, and more realistically, is that you have vested interest in life. You are invested. You have interests in life. You have maslahah in life. You want to be here. You want to have a good life for your families, for your children, a better country for your people, flourishing of human flourishing. You want that. And that's one of the best reasons why you should be here. Because you want to advance the human existence, your own existence. It begins with selfishness, that you want to have your own success. But then when you have good success, you become altruistic and you want to share the success with others. And you want to create the good society. So you also invested in that society. That's what the reason, when someone is corrupt, you don't want to do business with them. Because if you do with enough people corruption, you are going to lose out, because you're not going to have a fair chance of placing a tender for that contract. Because there are some people who are corrupt and they will get the contracts and you're not going to do it. Because you remember the story is that when the king asked everybody to throw a cup of milk into the well, everyone thought, well, if I throw a cup of water in it, who will know? And the next morning the king found there was no milk in the well, because everybody thought the same way. So if you think, I can do corruption, so long as other people don't know, the society is not going to go forward. So economic corruption, political corruption is the number one issue in Muslim society, Muslim majority societies. That's the number one issue. And Islamic reform can do nothing to that. Islamic reform can only make those good people amongst us feel good, that they at least have some kind of moral, they have a moral roadmap that they can work towards. And groups like Islamic Renaissance Front and others are trying to provide good roadmaps for communities who are prepared to go on, as Dr. Isham said, this hard path. But I also don't think that we have to be, completely thinking that we have to have everything Islamic. This Islamization mindset has really done serious damage. So we must have an Islamic, microphone, and we must have an Islamic software system, and we must have Islamic houses and all this kind of nonsense, okay? And I hope and if anybody disagrees, please feel free to disagree. And that is because we have misunderstood what it is. My grandmother, who prayed 5 times a day, she was a better Muslim than me in many ways. I mean, she was also illiterate. No, maybe I don't think she should have been illiterate, but I will make sure that my children are not illiterate and other people's children are not illiterate. The question is that these issues about what we call cultural Islam is perfectly good. Don't condemn people, you know, who pray 5 times a day and don't do Islamic banking and don't do caliphate. They are good Muslims. We should not be judgmental about them. Part of the problem with reformers and so on, they want to change other people. You know, when it ain't broke, don't fix it. When it is not broken, don't fix it. Okay? Muslims are perfectly good. We are flawed human beings. You think Islamists are not flawed? Or people who are doing political Islam are not flawed human beings? We are all flawed. And we have to accept ourselves in the flaws. Our problem is that we want kind of 100% morality. We never get 100% morality. Not even the Prophet's society was 100% morality. There people were flogged for sexual violations, for alcohol drinking, all this kind of stuff. I mean, I'm not saying they're not. This a human society. We are human beings. And what we need to do is to work towards the common good. Stop being hard on ourselves. And what I talked about earlier, that we need to have a framework of interpreting and understanding religion in terms of life experiences. That should be the framework and the lens through which we look at the religion and life. And not create this, you know, division between life and religion, between religion and between salvation and living in this world and flourishing. That's what I'm trying to argue against, and saying that we need to develop a tradition that is both a tradition of thinking within the questions of faith and do that, but we also need intellectual excellence to have better political systems, better economic systems. We need intellectual excellence all around. But intellectual excellence cannot happen if you don't have good governance systems. Because whatever you might do right, the governance system is going to create a breakdown. It's like punching holes in a ship. And you're trying to block the holes and other people are making more holes. So governance is the #1 issue I've come to realize. When you create a life for human dignity and human sufficiency, and the question of human development becomes a #1 issue, that no one's child should be illiterate. No one should be sleeping hungry at night. No one should be taking crazy decisions. And how we can create a better society for all human beings to flourish. Yesterday when I came in, my taxi driver, we talked about all kinds of things and the politics in the country and why some people couldn't be here, and they had this new alliance happening and so on. Talk. At some point, she starts saying, I like PAS. I said, why? She said, they're Islamic. Now I wonder what she thinks about if I told her that she likes PAS. I didn't want to be bad to her. But say, if you do a PAS, you can't be a taxi driver and having a man in your car. It's khalwa. And that will end her. She's an electrician, but her husband didn't want her to work as an electrician, so she became a taxi driver. Okay? She's qualified as an electrician, she told me. This is the crazy thinking that happens because the lack of clarity. The lack of clarity which ordinary human beings should be having a certain lack of clarity, but we have polarized our society so much that only PAS is truly Islamic and everybody else is un-Islamic. So this is how it happens in our minds. We think that, Malaysia is democracy, but most of us think, it's really not what God wants for me, and so you make tawbah at night, and maybe one day God will take me to Mecca and I will die there, and I die in a good place. That's what most people used to think, and so on. We get out of the jahiliyyah of democracy. So most people haven't worked this out in their heads, including secular educated people, as Dr. Moosa pointed out. The biggest challenge today is that we have secular educated Muslims who understand the world, who are very unhappy about how unfairly they are treated, and they have a lot of anger. They have a lot of anger in them. And so they are smart, angry, and a chip on their shoulder. They have all the answers to the world. You just shoot your way through. Just shoot your way out, kill as many people as possible, and then at some point God will come in and miraculously save you, and create the alternative society. Or it is so much anger that the only way that you can feel strong is to destroying others and yourself as part of a machine for some kind of utopia that will never be realized. So what we really need, in short, Islamic reform needs that we all have to be checked by psychologists and psychiatrists for sanity. The number one thing for forward going is we all have to become sane. Sanity is lacking. And I'm not trying to trivialize it. I'm not trivializing this. But we really need to check ourselves for sanity because of the psychological ways in which we have been confronted with so many different discourses of religion and political alternatives that we are totally confused by what is going on. And we hardly believe anybody that we come into contact with, or we believe them for 2 days and then we dispense with them, right? And so we're happy with this one, we move to that one. So there's such a huge amount of movement between that because ordinary Muslims, lay Muslims, are really confused. Who do they really follow? There's levels of confusion. So reform means that we have to really bring down a level of sanity that we can say that, it's okay for you to be Muslim the way you are. You are good as you are. And try to do more good from where you are. Don't do this, don't do corruption, don't do this, don't do that. And just follow that very basic teachings. So we can get some level of what's name. But otherwise, our thinking becoming completely out of what's name. Thank you.
Given our time limitations, does anybody have a question?
Assalamualaikum. Thank you for the presentation. Just to extend, Malaysia is a multicultural society. Malaysia is a multicultural country. And as a Muslim, I believe that Islam has a role, has a good to offer to all races, all people. So in this case of Islamic reform, what role can the non-Muslims offer or help? Because whatever happen will affect all in the society. Thank you.
Dr. Isham,
okay, I mean, I can say things and then run away and you people can then face the music. So, many years ago, okay, two things. My taxi driver yesterday, I must go back to my taxi driver. So I tell her why. She said she liked a certain politician. I said why? And she likes a certain politician now also. I said why? She said because that politician takes care of the Muslims. So I tell her, if that politician takes care of the Muslims, and I said, how does he take care of you? Well, education at the University of Malaya is very expensive. And I get an educational subsidy for my children. So I said, do the Chinese and other ethnic groups get that? She said, maybe not, but maybe not as much. So I said, do you think it's fair? Do you think it is fair that you get subsidies and others don't get subsidies? She wasn't clear whether other communities don't get subsidies. She wasn't clear about that. They don't. They don't get. So I remember about when was Anwar Ebrahim Minister of Education? I came as his guest to this country. And I was part of WAMI, World Association of Muslim Youth meeting in Genting Hills. So we talked, and as I was on the airport, some people met me at the airport and they discovered I'm from South Africa. And you would immediately know which ethnic group they came from. And we start talking and they say, you're from South Africa? And I'm one of the first South Africans who came that Malaysia allowed, because Malaysia had a ban on South Africans coming, but I get special exemption to come. And so these people met me and they talked. And they said, well, you come from a country with apartheid. We have apartheid in this country too. And I said, yes. And so when I met Anwar and I talked to him and I told him that, there are citizens in your country who are complaining about apartheid. So he was very defensive. And he said, they don't tell you about all that. And I do believe that Anwar today doesn't hold that same view anymore, right? Now, the question about in a democracy, you need to have fairness. And yes, there's affirmative action in a whole variety of ways. But, you know, as the studies have shown that if affirmative action turns into entitlement, you're not going to have growth. You're not going to have advancement in the best ways that you want to do so. So your question about a multicultural, multi-religious society, you know, I come from South Africa where we have huge amounts of affirmative action for people that historically been deprived, African people, black people been deprived, people of other color, so they can have access to education, they can have access to the economy and so on. There's a lot of that going on. But it also develops into the fastest level of corruption ever. The fastest level of corruption amongst black South Africans, extraordinary levels. And how can we make that better? So it is one of those things that, you know, you need to have your best minds at the table to think about these issues, that you must put in some sunset clauses when these things happen, and you know, so that you can have the best society ever, and so that everybody in the society can flourish. So in a multicultural societies, multi-religious, multicultural societies, what other communities will do, and you will contribute, that you will work towards the common good. That is what a multicultural society does. That is Islam. Advancing the common good. That is Deen, in my view. The common good is the Deen. Now the common good for a Hindu, for a Buddhist, for a Muslim will have slight variations, but generally you will come to a consensus. You need to keep on talking and talking and talking until you arrive at consensus. And what is the common good? It doesn't, no scripture can teach you that, but you will arrive at it. And in some areas, the ideas of what is the good might be variances. But that's fine. You can't have such a dictatorship of the common good that everybody must have the same idea of what the common good is. You must also have diversity. So you can have primary common goods, and you can have secondary levels where people will have their cultural differences and experiences, and so on and so forth. So I think that, you know, these are something that the creative people, remember I talked about creative people, the creative people in your society will work out and find the answers. The answers is not in the past. The answers are in your experiences, how you've done thus far, how much you've succeeded, where you have failed, and how do you make improvement forward. That is the solution. The solution lies in your experiences and what's going to optimize the good in your society. Not anything that any scripture or any teaching is going to give you the answer. But you need to understand that that answer that you're going to arrive at is as sacred for your society as something else was for someone else in the past. And you all need to, once you agree on that, you need to hold on to that. And anybody who violates that sacred agreement that you have is a transgressor and should be dealt with in the most humane way, but also in an exemplary way. Exemplary but humane.
This is the problem. Because you are Muslim, that's why you must treat other people fairly, not the other way around. If you look at the concept is Rahmatan lil Alamin. The Quran argues that God is Rahmatan lil Alamin, not Rahmatan just for Muslim. So when you say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, you are talking as Islam as a Muslim. You should be treating other people equally. And you will be held accountable for mistreating them also. So there's no country that's not multiple, plural. Every country is plural. So this argument that we are the exception, we're not the exception. But this argument, as I always said, there was one case where a friend of mine went to Cambodia with a Chinese doctor. And she said, in spite of our religion, we got along. I said, because of your religion, you got along. That's why you went, because you wanted Islam deals with humanitarian issues, so do Buddhists. So she went because of her religion or compassion that came from her religion. So this argument that discrimination, we should discriminate, Malay rights and all these other things need to be rethought in terms of the true Islamic understanding.
Thank you very much once again. Just two points which came to my mind from the engagement here. and this relates to the question posed by our brother there. There is a problem in and a kind of disease, actually, among Muslim intellectuals. They don't work to promote what I might call the scientific or scholarly community. You will find that each individual or few individuals, they are just working as if they are isolated islands. And therefore, this consensus or common ground that can be reached, of course, will be a failure, because people, every now and then you find people trying to reinvent the wheel. This is a problem. I just give you one example. Recently, about 2 or 3 years ago, a very important book came from a prominent Islamic institution about the renewal of Islamic legal theory of usul fiqh, written by a group of people, most of them junior scholars, but under the tutorship of a prominent scholar. And I was happy, because this is my field, to read this book. So I was expecting. Unfortunately, I was totally frustrated. Why? The reason because major questions, major propositions or submissions made by early scholars in modern times, but these people, about 12 of them, including, and the 13th is the boss, as if they are the first people to speak on the topic. Although many others discussed it decades ago and have interesting points to propose, interesting ideas to advance. But unfortunately, these people, the other thing is, I just would suggest and recommend the reading of old book, actually, but I still see its relevance today. A book by a famous American sociologist of Russian origin, Peter Sorokin, The Crisis of Our Age. I find many of the ideas discussed by this guy, the book was first published in 1941, but it's still very relevant. And I hope if you find the chance, really try to read it and try to make sense of it for our own concerns and problems. Thank you very much.
Just to end this on a positive note, maybe I didn't want to make it negative. Ibn Arabi, the great Ibn Arabi, the mystic and scholar, in his book, the Tarjuman al-Ashwaq, draws a very beautiful picture of the pilgrim, or it could be the pilgrim, it is metaphorical, or it could be the birds flying around the Kaaba. And he says that these birds, they fly around, or these pilgrims, they walk around hour after hour, out of passion, out of love, and they want to touch my legs. The Kaaba is speaking, you know, that these people walking around. تطوف بقلبي ساعة بعد ساعة لوجد وتبريح وتلثم أركاني كما طاف خير الرسل بالكعبة التي يقول الدليل العقل فيها بالنقصان وقبل أحجارا بها وهو ناطق فأين مقام البيت من قدر إنساني. He says that these people walk around and they want to touch my legs, and then they pick up some stones and they kiss some stones, and then the Prophet announces. The Prophet announces and he says, what is the status of the house compared to the value of a human being? The value of the human being is always the highest. And so even the sacred house pales in insignificance to the human being. Because the sacred house is in service. God made it a sacred place in service of humanity. Without that humanity, that place has no significance. And so, at the end, the best of our thinking was about humane thinking, altruistic thinking, generous thinking, caring thinking. That's the embodiment of our teachings. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, our dear respected speakers. Well, we end up with the thinking, with the necessity to think critically, think big, to see the big picture, the Taj Mahal picture. I believe it's quite easy when we're still all sitting here and engaging in this stimulating discussion. It will be a little bit more difficult when you go out there and you will have to decide for yourself what to think about and what not to think about. But I would like to repeat something I said at the previous session we had with Dr. Nader Hashemi at the University of Nottingham. I really wish that there was no need for such an organization as Islamic Renaissance Front and the others. And we wouldn't have had this need to sit here and pose uncomfortable questions and reason about it. And instead of that, we could spend our time for, I don't know, sitting somewhere else and improving technology of printing, 3D printing of people's body organs, or improving various kinds of devices to help people with limited capacities. And that, to my mind, would be really Islamic to do. Thank you. And I would pass mic to Ehsan to close today's session.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Prof. Ebrahim Musa. Thank you, Dr. Isham. Thank you, Dr. Tahir. I would like to call for another round of applause for a very interesting discussion today. Tomorrow we're going to have another discussion, also featuring Professor Ebrahim Musa, but the discussion is going to be a lot more political. So it's going to be a discussion on Islam in global politics, the civilizational crisis. So I'm sure some of the points and discussion which we've been touched today will also make relevant for tomorrow's discussion. Besides that, I would like to thank everyone, thank speakers, distinguished guests, and other friends of IRF, and hope you all would attend our other programs and events as well. And before we end, as usual, we have, I will put some high tea, simple high tea for us to eat. So look forward to meet you all again. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.